world as we know it hangs by an invisible thread, a 30-kilometer-wide artery through which the lifeblood of the global financial system flows. As you watch this video, a chess move is being prepared in the depths of the Strait of Hormuz. It is a move that does not merely seek to win a military battle, but to erase the hegemony of the US dollar from the map, and with it, the stability of your bank account. We are not talking about a distant possibility. We are talking about a scenario where in a matter of 30 minutes, the stock market could lose trillions of dollars, evaporating savings pensions, and the trust in the system that has ruled the planet since the end of World War II. To understand the magnitude of the looming disaster, we must stop looking at superficial headlines and observe the map. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a geographical accident between Iran and Oman. It is the most critical choke point on the planet. Nearly 30% of all the oil consumed in the world every day passes through this funnel. If Iran decides to close this door, not only do the ships stop, the heart of capitalism stops. Imagine for a second that gasoline prices do not rise by 10 or 20%, but double overnight. That is the trigger for a chain reaction that no central bank, not the US Federal Reserve nor the European Central Bank, is prepared to contain. The real story here is not just the missiles or the aircraft carriers that the United States has deployed in the area. The real story is how a country under extreme sanctions has managed to build an asymmetric defense network so sophisticated that it has checkmated the world's most powerful navy. Iran does not need to win an open war, it only needs to create doubt. The moment an intelligent mine or a low-cost drone hits a tanker, maritime insurers will cancel all policies. Ships will stop sailing not out of fear of bombs, but because of the economic impossibility of operating without insurance. That is the moment energy stops flowing, and financial chaos begins its unstoppable march toward your home. When the flow of energy is interrupted, inflation stops being a number in the news and becomes a destructive force of reality. Every product you consume, from the bread on your table to the device you are using to watch this video, depends on transportation and energy. A closure of the Strait of Hormuz would send a shockwave that would force companies to raise prices aggressively to survive. This, in turn, would force governments to raise interest rates to unseen levels, causing a crash in the real estate market and a paralysis in credit. It is a financial black hole that swallows everything in its path. But why is this happening now? The answer lies in a silent alliance that has changed the rules of the game. Iran is not acting alone. Behind every Iranian radar system, behind every long-range cruise missile, lies the shadow of Russian technology and Chinese satellite surveillance. Russia has shared invaluable lessons learned on modern battlefields with Tehran, while China provides the data infrastructure that allows tracking every move of the US fleet in real time. What we are witnessing is the birth of a bloc that has decided the Strait of Hormuz is the perfect place to demonstrate that the century of American dominance is over. The United States faces an impossible dilemma. If it strikes preemptively to secure the strait, it risks triggering a regional war that would involve its Gulf allies and potentially draw Russia and China into a direct confrontation. If it does nothing, it allows Iran to dictate the terms of world trade. This strategic paralysis is precisely what its adversaries were looking for. They know that the Western financial system is fragile, over-leveraged, and depends on stability to keep from crumbling. By stirring the hornet's nest in Hormuz, they are striking at the very foundation of international confidence. Let's talk about the tunnels. Recent intelligence reports have revealed that Iran has bored into its coastal mountains to create underground missile cities. These are not simple warehouses. They are operational launch centers protected by hundreds of meters of solid rock, immune to conventional airstrikes. From these tunnels, they can launch swarms of drones and anti-ship missiles that would saturate the defenses of any US destroyer. The strategy is clear: saturation and attrition. It is not about sinking the entire fleet, but about inflicting such costly damage that public opinion and markets in the West demand a withdrawal. Meanwhile, on the stock exchanges of New York, London, and Tokyo, high-frequency algorithms are already primed for a massive sell-off. Big investors know that energy is the basis of all value. If the oil supply is threatened, the dollar, which for decades has been the reserve currency thanks to the Petrodollar agreement, loses its reason for being. If producing countries start accepting other currencies because the United States can no longer guarantee security on maritime routes, the value of the dollar would plummet, causing hyperinflation on American soil that would change the social order forever. You might think this is an exaggeration, but look at the data from past crises. In minutes, panic can wipe out trillions in wealth. What makes the current situation different is that we are not facing a financial bubble that bursts on its own, but a controlled demolition by powers that have every interest in seeing the current system fall. China and Russia have been aggressively hoarding gold for years, preparing for the day when Western fiat currency loses its luster. The conflict in the Strait of Hormuz is simply the switch that could light the fuse of this change of era. Iran's layered defense is another masterpiece of asymmetric warfare. It is not limited to missiles. They have deployed thousands of smart naval mines that can lie dormant on the seafloor for months, activating only when they detect the specific acoustic signature of a warship. Furthermore, their fleet of midget submarines is almost impossible to track in the noisy, shallow waters of the Gulf. These invisible assets mean that even if the U.S. managed to destroy all land-based launch sites, the danger would still lurk beneath the waves, turning the strait into a permanent exclusion zone for global trade. Diplomacy seems to be at a dead end. Neighboring countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are in an extremely precarious position. They know their own oil facilities are within reach of Iranian missiles, and that any overt support for a U.S. military intervention could result in their own economic destruction. This caution from regional allies further isolates Washington, forcing it to act alone in an environment where every aggressive move is seen by the world as a step toward World War III. For the average citizen, this means one thing: absolute uncertainty. The just-in-time system on which our modern logistics is based does not allow for interruptions. If electronic components do not arrive from Asia, or if fertilizers are not distributed due to fuel costs, supply chains break. We are talking about empty shelves and expensive basic services. The war of the 21st century is not fought only with tanks. It is fought in the supermarket and on the electricity bill. Iran has also played the card of internal resilience. Unlike Western nations, whose social stability depends on a constant flow of credit and consumption, Iran has lived under a resistance economy for decades. Their command structure is decentralized. If the central leadership is hit, regional commanders have clear orders to continue operating autonomously. This means there is no off switch for the Iranian threat. It is a persistent network that will keep striking until the cost of war is unbearable for the invader. The battle for the narrative is equally intense. While Western media speaks of defending freedom of navigation, media aligned with the BRICS bloc presents Iran as a David standing up to an imperialist Goliath. This division of world public opinion is fundamental to the success of Tehran's strategy, as it weakens international support for any sanctions or military action. The world is no longer unipolar, and what happens in Hormuz is the ultimate proof that power has fragmented. As we look toward the near future, we must ask the question that risk analysts dare not answer out loud. What if this is the end of the system as we know it? If the dollar loses its safe haven status due to a strategic defeat in the Middle East, the massive debt of Western nations will become unpayable. We would enter an era of global realignment where real power will be measured by the possession of tangible resources: energy, food, and precious metals. The Strait of Hormuz is today the ignition point of a perfect storm. It is where geopolitics, advanced military technology, and financial fragility meet. It is not a matter of if there will be a spark, but how much longer the current system can contain the pressure before it all explodes. Troop movements, satellite deployments, and market fluctuations tell us the clock is already ticking. When the sun sets over the Persian Gulf tomorrow, the question will not be how many ships cross the strait, but how much closer we are to the moment the chessboard is kicked over for good. Technological superiority is no longer a guarantee of victory when the opponent is willing to sink the entire system rather than be dominated. We are facing a new type of war, one where the most powerful weapon is not an atomic bomb, but the closure of a 30-kilometer-wide maritime route. Stay tuned, because the coming days could define the economy for the rest of your life. History is not written with words. It is written with oil, gold, and the courage of men who dare to challenge the established order. The Strait of Hormuz is on fire, and the smoke from that fire will very soon reach the doors of every home on the planet. The game is reaching its final phase, and the checkmate to the global financial system seems closer than ever. Continuing this analysis of the architecture of chaos, we must dive into the darkness of the deep sea, where NATO's detection technology faces its greatest challenge. It is not just about missiles flying over the water, but about what lurks beneath it. Iran has perfected the use of Ghadir-class midget submarines, nearly undetectable vessels that operate in the thermally complex and noisy waters of the Persian Gulf. These small predators do not seek a traditional naval battle against an aircraft carrier. Their mission is far more surgical and devastating. They are designed to sow next-generation smart minefields, capable of distinguishing between a small fishing boat and the massive hull of a supertanker, or an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. Imagine the paralysis this generates for the U.S. High Command. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow channel, with very defined entry and exit routes. If a single vessel is hit and left adrift, the channel is physically blocked. But the psychological blockage is even worse. The moment the presence of these autonomous mines is confirmed, commercial traffic will stop dead. No captain, no matter how much pressure they receive from oil companies, will risk a cargo of 2 million barrels of crude oil without an absolute guarantee of security that today, quite simply, no one can give. This is where the vulnerability of the London Maritime insurance system, Lloyd's, comes into play. If risk premiums skyrocket from $5,000 to $1 million per trip, the flow of energy stops by financial decree before the first combat alarm even sounds. Meanwhile, on the electronic warfare front, the situation is just as critical. Reports suggest that Russia has supplied Iran with state-of-the-art jamming systems that can blind global positioning systems in critical areas of the Gulf. A ship that cannot trust its GPS and whose radars are being saturated by ghost signals is a blind ship in one of the busiest routes in the world. This ability to generate digital fog of war allows Iranian forces to maneuver in the shadows, launching lightning strikes with missile-armed fast boats and retreating before enemy air defenses can react. It is death by 1,000 cuts, a strategy designed to exhaust the resources and morale of a superpower accustomed to facing visible enemies. But let us cross the ocean to observe the reaction in Asia, the true engine of global energy demand. China, Japan, and South Korea depend almost exclusively on this oil to keep their industries running. For Beijing, the closure of Hormuz is an existential threat, but also a golden strategic opportunity. For years, China has been building the Central Asian gas pipeline network and ports in Pakistan, such as Gwadar, to try and bypass the strait. However, these alternatives cannot replace the massive volume coming out of the Gulf. If the oil stops, the factories in Shenzhen and Shanghai stop. This would force China to use its strategic reserves and eventually to intervene, not to support the United States, but to impose its own order in the region. We would be witnessing the moment when the Chinese yuan finally displaces the dollar in energy transactions, as producing countries seek the protection of the only power capable of buying their product amidst the chaos. Let's talk about the dronification of conflict. We are entering an era where artificial intelligence decides who lives and who dies on the battlefield. Iran has proven to be a world leader in producing low-cost, high-effectiveness drones such as the Shahed, which have changed the rules of the game in Eastern Europe and are now ready to be used in massive swarms against the U.S. fleet. The logic is simple and brutal. A U.S. interceptor missile costs $2 million, while an Iranian drone costs barely $20,000. If you launch 100 drones at once, you force the defender to spend millions of dollars in seconds, depleting their inventory of high-tech ammunition. Eventually, defenses are saturated, inventory runs out, and a single drone gets through. That single impact is enough to put a billion-dollar ship out of action. It is an economic asymmetry that favors the one with less to lose. This reality leads us back to the heart of the financial system. The derivatives market, those complex instruments banks use to bet on the future price of things, is a powder keg. There are trillions of dollars in contracts tied to the stability of oil and interest rates. A supply shock in Hormuz would not only raise the price of crude, it would trigger default levels in companies that cannot cover their energy costs. This would create a domino effect reaching commercial banks, causing a global credit contraction. In this scenario, fiat money, paper currency, loses its appeal. That is why we see central banks worldwide buying gold at record levels. They know that in a crisis of this magnitude, gold is not just a metal. It is the only form of payment that does not depend on the promise of a government that could be collapsing. At this point in the conflict, internal propaganda in Iran plays a fundamental role. The regime has managed to convince its population that they are fighting a sacred battle for national sovereignty against an enemy seeking their economic suffocation. This social cohesion, even if forced, allows them to endure hardships that a Western society, accustomed to comfort and immediate consumption, would not tolerate. The Iranian military command has been trained to operate under the concept of mosaic war, where each local unit has the authority to act independently if central communications are destroyed. It is an organic structure, impossible to decapitate with a single strike against Tehran. Meanwhile, in Washington, political pressure is stifling. A president facing elections or a popularity crisis cannot afford for gasoline prices to rise to Great Depression levels. This pushes leaders to make hasty decisions, such as commando raids or cyber attacks against Iranian infrastructure. However, cyberspace is another battlefield where Iran, supported by Russian experts, has offensive capabilities that could strike back by affecting power grids or banking systems on American soil. There is no safe place in this interconnected global war. The question everyone asks is how long this confrontation can last. History teaches us that conflicts in the Middle East have an inertia of their own. What begins as a naval skirmish can last months or years, permanently transforming trade routes. We are seeing the end of globalization as we knew it. Companies will begin to move their factories closer to home, trade will fragment into regional blocs, and energy security will become the #1 priority over climate change or the free market. Let us now look at the role of cryptocurrencies and digital assets in this chaos. In a situation where SWIFT and traditional banking systems are under attack or blocked, digital assets could serve as an escape valve for capital movement, but also as a tool for states to evade sanctions. However, the volatility of these assets in the face of a digital blackout or a conflict of this scale makes them an uncertain haven. Real value will return to the basics: productive land, sources of clean water, and of course, energy in any form, from coal to uranium. The Strait of Hormuz is ultimately the mirror where the world sees its own fragility. We have built an incredibly advanced technological civilization that depends on a constant flow of resources through a channel that can be closed with a couple of sunken ships. It is the paradox of our era. While we talk about colonizing Mars, our destiny is decided in turquoise waters surrounded by desert and missiles. If this conflict scales to its final phase, we will see massive intervention from international powers. Not just the United States, but a coalition led by China to stabilize the flow of crude. But that stability will come at a price: the end of Western control over the maritime routes of the Indian Ocean. The map of world power is being redrawn in real time, and every explosion in the Gulf is a brushstroke in this new order. For you, watching this analysis, the message is clear. Diversification is not just financial advice, it is a survival strategy. Do not trust that the system that has worked for the last 50 years will still be there tomorrow. Complacency is the greatest enemy in times of paradigm shifts. The Strait of Hormuz is on fire, and although the flames may seem distant, the heat is already starting to melt the foundations of our global economy. We are reaching a point where diplomacy is just a mask to buy time, while weapon depots fill up and satellites are positioned. Do not be fooled by speeches of calm. Watch the fleet movements, gold prices, and oil inventories. That is where the real story is told. Checkmate is not a quick move. It is the result of constant pressure that leaves the opponent with no options. And today, the world seems to be running out of squares to move its king. Keep your vision clear and your mind cold. What is coming will not be easy, but those who understand the currents of power flowing through Hormuz will be the only ones capable of navigating the storm ahead. History is watching us, and the outcome of this crisis will mark the lives of the next 3 generations. Welcome to the reality of the 21st century, where power is not asked for, it is taken, and where economics is just another form of war by other means. The clock keeps ticking, and the sound we hear is not just the waves in the strait, but the sound of the old world crumbling to make way for something we still do not fully grasp.